Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is killed. He has been martyred by the Zionist entity. Okay. Hezbollah came out and confirmed his assassination. Iran has vowed to retaliate. I hope the chatters that are in Lebanon are okay. I hope they're safe. We are keeping you guys in our minds and our hearts.
The Israeli military said Nasrallah was at Hezbollah's underground headquarters, one of several sites targeted in a series of massive explosions that the Lebanese health ministry says killed at least 6 and injured more than 90 others. The killing of Nasrallah not only strikes a blow to terrorist group's leadership, but could also trigger a wider war with Hezbollah's main backer, Iran. Imtiaz Tayyab has the latest from Beirut.
Were people really cheering, or is that propaganda? Yes. Like I've said before, the Lebanese society is very diverse, has had a litany of infighting and complications. A lot of the Lebanese society also despises their governance, and they see Hezbollah as taking advantage of that power vacuum pretty much because like they are one of the more popular parties and are the basic standing military of Lebanon in general. So for this reason, I think like some people definitely have different opinions about Hezbollah in general. Their domestic governance obviously is not great either. Having said that, however, most people see it as like a defensive posture that Hezbollah presents towards Israel, and they certainly hate Israel a lot more than they even hate Hezbollah. But the video that they were using to say people were cheering Hassan Nasrallah's assassination is from 2019, and that's it. The way I would describe it is like if there was an alien force that was not China, like far more powerful than America, right? Like an insane power. And this alien force was attacking America relentlessly, showing that they wanted to occupy. And then they assassinated like the Republican paramilitary that was like actively fighting against the aliens. Most Americans would be like, this is completely unacceptable. Like, even if you had a disagreement with the Republicans in that regard, you would still be like, well, they're up in arms against like a much more powerful enemy. So that's the way to analyze it. Hezbollah done got rocked. Hezbollah in shambles. Worst metaphor in history. I think it's a phenomenal metaphor because regardless of your opinions in terms of like domestic policy, if you are faced with a far larger enemy, I'm trying to explain it to Americans who have never actually faced a far larger enemy. So that's why I'm using the alien analogy. There's no other way to describe it. Ultimately, if aliens dropped a massive bomb in the middle of New York to like assassinate the leadership of like the Republican paramilitaries that were fighting against them, you would probably be like, that's the much larger enemy would be the aliens in this circumstance. And you don't have to look any further than Ukraine to understand this. There are plenty of Ukrainians who did not like the Azov battalion, who did not like the Nazis in Ukraine, who fought against said Nazis in Ukraine, who, once the much larger enemy, Russia, came in and started blowing their goddamn cities, entire city blocks, became aligned with the Azov battalion. That's usually how things go. This was something that I mentioned in the beginning of the invasion as well, where I talked about how invading a country does not denazify it. As a matter of fact, it just galvanizes and emboldens some of the more fascist elements within the country and turns them into national heroes because their emancipatory goals are now completely justified. Not even making a comparison between Hezbollah and Nazis. I'm just using that as an analog for people to understand, especially because a lot of people who despise Hezbollah love, you know, the Azov battalion. Hassan, I need an explanation. Yesterday during the bombing of Beirut, some CNN journalists were sheltering. Could you explain why that would be necessary? They themselves say that Israel is precise and targeted when they strike. Why would they be afraid? Can't put my finger on it. Because Israel cannot be analyzed from the perspective of a belligerent, okay, in American news. But they are. They are not only belligerent as like in the war terminology, but they're also belligerent in the way that you colloquially understand the term. They're insane. And that is precisely the reason why, of course, Americans are obviously understandably fearful. As the United States of America, we can't acknowledge that Israel is a belligerent occupier in Lebanon. So we take this weird posture where we're like, yeah, you got to take your own tickets out if you want to leave. We can't even evacuate. Hi, I'm Lebanese and just wanted to note that a lot of people that don't support Hezbollah, including me, but in these circumstances, living under the threat of a genocidal and destructive state, we see Hezbollah as our only form of resistance. So it's shocking when you hear the leader of our resistance is dead. Exactly. No, I totally get that. I totally understand that. Are we seriously mourning the death of the head of a terrorist organization? I'm going to tell you right now, if you have this opinion, you 1,000,000% would mourn if, again, an alien force out of nowhere came in and assassinated like hundreds of civilians in the middle of Chicago to like execute whatever Republican military general that was fighting against those aliens. Okay. You would be like, that's unimaginable. That is insane. I can't believe this just happened. You can slap on the terrorist sticker over and over again. But what you fail to recognize is Israel is a far greater terror in the region. It's just that we don't analyze Israel as a terrorist organization because it's a state. Okay. And it's not only a state, but it's also a state that's aligned with the United States. If you want to see a terror state, we consider Iran to be a terrorist state. We consider Russia to be a terrorist state. Those countries are outside of the scope of influence of the United States of America, and they are personally viewed as a state sponsor of terror. Israel is significantly larger in terms of the terror it presents to enemies that it occupies, enemies that it is a belligerent occupier of in an unjustifiable war that it wages upon every country in the region and all of the territories that it currently illegally militarily occupies. It doesn't really matter what sticker you're slapping onto it. It doesn't change that dynamic at all. In terms of analyzing Hezbollah's militancy in the dynamic between Israel and Hezbollah, when you look at the tit-for-tat bombing campaigns that occurred since October 7 between Israel and Hezbollah, Israel is responsible for 82% of all bombing, and that number has actually grown now. If we're going to look at it on a same moral boundary, if we're going to operate on the same moral playing field, Hezbollah is the far greater lesser evil in that situation. Okay? Incredibly restricted and restrained in terms of its tit-for-tat military campaigns in comparison to Israel, because Israel doesn't have to be restrained. Israel can do whatever the it wants, and America will give it billions and billions of dollars that they are going to give to Israel instead of you. Free college education to fix the potholes, or to harden our infrastructure against climate change and the natural disasters that seemingly occur at a rapid clip, at a more rapid clip than before. Year over year, America is both under fire and also underwater at the same time. Our infrastructure is falling apart, and we have absolutely nothing going on to fix it because there's no money for that. Okay, we can't do that. We can't do that. There's no money for the top of the hour ad break avoidance fee, because at the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break, and you could be defensive against that by subscribing.
Triggering deafening explosions and sending huge plumes of crimson smoke in the skies above. On the ground, near total devastation, at least 4 buildings pulverized. Israel's military says it killed Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and this morning the group confirmed he was dead. Syed Hassan Nasrallah was a singular figure within the political and paramilitary force. Known for his fiery speeches, like this one we attended in August. For 32 years, he led Hezbollah, which means
Hassan Kanafani, bodies fall, ideas live forever. It's not just ideas as well. It's ideals. Not just ideas, but ideals, okay? Like, people understandably have a need for emancipation. People understandably do not want to live under permanent military occupation. People don't want to get bombed into bits, okay? That's a normal, understandable position that every human being has. So, of course, it does not matter. Assassinating the head of this organization will probably stop the bombing campaigns for like a little bit. Even that is not likely from the Hezbollah side. When you continuously and mercilessly and relentlessly occupy territory, more and more territory, you keep bombing these people, they're gonna fight back. There is no world in which you can bomb people so hard that they end up liking you. They're just gonna like you less. And this has happened over the course of the past 20 plus years of permanent military occupation in the Middle East with America. Look at Afghanistan. The Taliban has taken over Afghanistan again. It's stupid. There's only one commander for Hezbollah alive. Dude, I don't think you guys understand. Unless you personally think people's understandable resentment against Israel in the territory was because Hassan Nasrallah was like the singular figure mind controlling everyone to hate Israel, this doesn't make any sense. A lot of Americans fail to comprehend this. Americans, because we are so comfortable in the lap of luxury, in the first world, in the core of empire, we have no way to comprehend a much greater threat to our existence. We don't have any way of understanding that, so much so that we make up our own fake threats against us, like some goat herder in Afghanistan or some rice farmer in Vietnam. Like, we literally have 0 enemies. We have 800 military bases and 0 real enemies, so much so that we make up new ones in order to justify our check your pager. Like, this is again a powerless posturing as though they benefit from America and Israel's actions. You do not have health care. You will never achieve the American dream. You will never be able to own a house. You will never be able to get upward social mobility. Your life will be worse than your parents' generation. But because you recognize that, you have to like grab onto anything. You have to grab onto anything and everything you can to be like, well, no, this is check your pager. You're Hezbollah. You're going to die.
Nasrallah's death would be a potentially catastrophic blow for the group. Several of Hezbollah's military commanders have been assassinated in other Israeli strikes since July. And thousands of its members were injured in booby-trapped pager and walkie-talkie explosions earlier this month, leaving it badly diminished and potentially leaderless. The stunning developments follow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to the UN General Assembly, where he received a mix of boos and applause.
And will continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met.
Yeah, I wonder what those objectives are. There's never been an instance where Israel has not said that they're doing this for like security concerns, just so you understand. It is always a security concern. Like the justification for the state of Israel existing since 1948. Oh, this is a security concern. This is a security concern. Understand that like that is the justification for you to hear in the Western world and understand and agree with. The tactic is always the same. Up, displace civilians, and then settlers come in and take over that territory. People understandably feel resentful and spiteful against Israel, fight back. Then Israel encroaches on more territory because you have to protect those civilians that now moved into that area, right? That's why people are desperately, inside of Israel, you have ultra-Orthodox, rabid, ultra-Zionist, ultra-nationalist settlers who are fascists trying to go into Gaza and settle again. And they have plans to settle Gaza again. This is what they did in the West Bank. This is what they used to do in Gaza. This is what they did in Sinai. And this is what they did in Golan Heights. This is what they did in Shebaa Farms, which is technically Lebanese territory according to Syria. And it doesn't matter, right? They will always have an appetite for more and more territorial acquisition. And then when they move people into that territory and the people that are now displaced from that territory are like, well, what the f is this? This was my family's farm. Why the f did you take that? Yeah, look, Israel is preparing for a limited incursion into Lebanon.
Overnight, Israeli warplanes targeted even more areas across Beirut's southern suburbs, reportedly carrying out at least 20 strikes before dawn.
These people cheering this on, which is just more civilians dying, brainwashed by Zionism, brainwashed into thinking Israel's legitimate. 1 out of 3 people in Haifa are non-Jewish Russians. This is nothing but colonial genocide of a different flavor, fake-ass state. Yeah, I mean, it is. It totally is.
Now, President Biden and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have both denied being given advance warning from Israel of the massive strikes targeting Nasrallah, with Secretary Austin saying the first time he was told about it was while the strikes were actually happening, as the White House now instructs the Pentagon to, quote, assess and adjust U.S. forces across the Middle East as needed. Jeff.
Yes, thank you.
Is election Donald Trump a better choice for the safety of Lebanon? No, there is no better choice. There is only one choice. America does what it wants to do. I need you guys to understand, okay? America and Israel, as an extension of America, is a force that will not change its trajectory regardless of whether a Democrat is in charge or a Republican is in charge. This is something that is important for a lot of people to comprehend because this is a Democratic administration doing this, and Democrats are supposed to at least present themselves as a counterbalance against the Republican incursions, against Republican neocon sentiment, against Republican death and destruction. And it's very obvious that they're not doing that. The Democrats are not doing that, and they're waging the exact same bloody war. So Donald Trump is not going to change that trajectory even a little bit, if not make it worse. It doesn't really matter to the people that are directly under this permanent occupation at this point. If you are living in these regions, there is unfortunately no solution for you in terms of like who is going to be, you know, who's going to be in charge of this death and destruction. And before you point to this, okay, and say, when Israel killed Ahmad Yassin, the leader of Hamas, the Bush administration condemned Israel for killing 7 others. When Israel killed Hassan Nasrallah, the Biden administration congratulates Israel for its measure of justice and Israel strikes against 300 people. This right here makes it seem as though George W. Bush is more moderate, okay? On Israel, he was. And I repeated this before. I talked about this like a couple days ago. But that does not mean that like the American foreign policy has moved so firmly into the right. This doesn't mean that like a Republican would would do that right now. Trump would do that right now. They would not. Understand where we are in terms of America being a uniparty in its analysis of foreign policy, okay? We are uniparty on foreign policy, especially. George W. Bush was more moderate technically and still up the bag in Israel-Palestine in very meaningful ways. George W. Bush was also a death-dealing warmonger. His administration is literally the worst. Still worse than the Biden administration, still worse than the Trump administration in terms of its foreign policy. Of course, it's unimaginable. No one approaches the death and destruction that the Bush administration dealt to the world, and even in terms of domestic policy, in terms of like greatly accelerating America's security apparatus and internal surveillance state. But having said that, we, as a consequence of George W. Bush and as a consequence of Barack Obama continuing that foreign policy, as a consequence of Donald Trump continuing that foreign policy, have now firmly moved as a uniparty to a level of like right-wing fascist behavior from the Democrats and the Republican Party both. This basically is what I am trying to explain to people, that like if your expectation is that, you know, one party is going to do it differently, it's not going to happen.